Thank you for having me, Anna.
So just a quick introduction. So you're currently a director of engineering at Masu Brakes North America. It's a company, for those who don't know, that designs and manufactures brake pads and brake linings for the automotive industry. And prior joining your current business, you've had a fantastic over 60-year long career at Federal Mogul. It's a huge automotive business. They're a global supplier of vape parts. And you've progressed through roles of increased responsibility, starting as a formulator, moving through application engineering, program management, product engineering. And prior to this, you were with Goodyear as a rubber compounder. So I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper in your experiences and see what advice we could share and best practices we could share to women who want to progress similar career path and leaders who want to develop teams within similar environments. So maybe would you explain a little bit more about your leadership journey? What have been the biggest milestones in your leadership journey?
Good to just get like a real quick background. I started and grew up in rural Nebraska on a farm. So, when I think of when I was little and what leadership vision I had, it wasn't what I've done. And I think there's probably a lot of boys and girls out there that have a similar current situation. So my leadership journey, I would say, probably started in high school already, where I was fortunate enough that my grandmother had started and owned her own real estate business. So I worked with her and got kind of my first glimpse into what a, strong female leader, she was absolutely fearless, could be, and got the chance to work with her and kind of get my feet wet for business. Went to university for engineering primarily because I love math and science, and I wanted to find a career that I knew I could make a good living at, and be independent. Independence was very important to me and still is today. I would kind of fell into automotive. In Lincoln, there aren't a lot of chemical engineering employers. Goodyear Tire and Rubber was one of the few that did co-ops for college students. And so I was able to win one of those positions while I was still at the university. And then I had a position and an offer to hire on actually before I even graduated with my undergraduate degree. So I wouldn't say in my 20s that automotive was a passion of mine, but I found it and really enjoyed learning about the material science, formulation, and compounding area during that time. From there, I was able to finish my master's degree and kind of completed at that point what my academic goals were. Goodyear was going through some transition and changes and closing that technical center at the time. So that's when I moved into the braking industry and have pretty much been here doing something to do with the braking systems on cars and heavy commercial vehicles since 2004. Went in, did a similar role, Federal Mogul, as you mentioned earlier, in formulation and product development. Wanted to learn more about the customer side, so actually moved to Michigan in 2005. And since then have worked in progressive roles of application engineering, really learning more about the customers, the customer requirements directly versus just the R&D side of the business. One of my biggest milestones in 2008, they kind of created and did some reorganization, and I was offered a role to manage the product development team, which was one of my big goals. I've always loved working with people. I had some opportunities before that in my career to manage co-op students, which I really enjoyed, and mentor them. So I had confirmed that was part of my passion. And it had that. So that was one of the biggest things. It was also one of the most challenging because at that time, in 2008, 9, and 10 is when here in the Detroit area especially, we went through the recession and we were having to downsize, having to let go some of my team, close an R&D center, things I never realized young in my career, that are part of leadership and a very important part of leadership. One of the big key pieces of advice that stood out to me from one of the executive leaders at that time was, as difficult it is to let a few go in a large business, and keep in mind this is a large corporation, you have the responsibility to the rest of the employees and the company to be able to make those hard and difficult decisions to keep everyone else's job. So it was a big perspective shift for me having that. Since then, I continued within the product development group, eventually made director of engineering, managed our product development group for the aftermarket side of our business for quite a while. And then Tenneco bought Federal-Mogul at that time. I moved into the business side and managed the whole braking product line for a short period of time. Learned a lot more about the business side, which was a great opportunity, but ultimately not a role that was a great fit for me in the end. In 2020, I found Masu Brakes, which is a smaller family-owned Indian company. I've worked with them doing everything. So we'll get into it in a little bit, but being a leader in a large corporation is completely different than essentially our US building here is a startup branch of our Indian entity. So I've completely flipped hats. I've switched from maybe 2 or 3 in a corporate role to about 20 here in more of a startup role, which has been just a complete change. I think a lot of people have gone through changes in their jobs over the last couple of years since COVID, but mine is completely flipped. So now essentially building a new business here instead of leading a very established, historical group, international group. So completely different, but great challenges.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke about it the first time, you said how it was not planned change at the time. It happened because of the acquisition. The role that you took on at the time within Federal-Mogul wasn't one that suited you best, and this opportunity presented itself. So it's not something that you planned in the past, but it turned out to be such a fantastic opportunity that gave you all these possibilities to do way more than you did at Federal-Mogul. So what are the key differences between what you did at Federal-Mogul in your last role? So that was Director of Product Management in your current role. So of course, being part of a large corporation, there are many counterparts to do similar position, many divisions, many product lines, many layers, and that has its different implications, right? There's a lot of well-defined processes and systems, but also it's probably a little bit more bureaucratic, and the decision-making process is slower. So tell me a little bit more in terms of what does your role look like now, how those responsibilities are different, what do you find most fascinating, why is it so fascinating in comparison to the other one?
I think the most exciting and inspiring part of what I'm doing now is being such everyday direct impact part of building something. I mean, we just bought a brick and mortar technical center here. We are literally filling an empty building, building up a prototype shop, a, testing lab, and our customer base here now. We have a established aftermarket customer base. We're looking, working to grow our OE side of the business. So it's all growth, right? And all new. Things happen very quickly. Decisions have to be made very quickly and very extremely agile environment versus, used a great word, the bureaucracy of a larger international corporation, right? Like those decisions, where you spend money, how you combine things, even to the point of, are you following a corporate standard, and are you, all of those things kind of, we're defining those now. So versus living within those walls, we're defining, do we even want walls, or, what things do we need to define and what don't we? So it's exhilarating. It's also honestly some days terrifying because, it is all change. I'm an extremely organized person by nature. So learning to and challenging myself to adapt to this a bit. I don't want to use uncertain from a business standpoint, but uncertain from what is my day going to look like, right? Uncertain, that uncertainty of, okay, I don't know when all my meetings are. I don't know what I'm all going to have to work on today. I don't know who's going to show up the door with a delivery. I found that shipping companies aren't always very reliable on their schedules. Sometimes they just show up and want to drop off something, and you figure it out. So having to really consciously challenge myself on how do you adapt and thrive in that environment, knowing it's what you want to do, but there's a natural environment everybody is best in. I think it is extremely rare, if non-existent, that anyone's going to find a job that actually fits that, on a regular basis. Hopefully you hit your key points and can move forward. So, from a leadership standpoint, I'm doing far less right now of direct management of individuals, because what I'm leading and doing right now is building the business and the foundation for the people that will come, right? So it's a completely different phase of leadership, probably more important in a lot of ways, because what we're establishing now will set that tone and set that path to success for everyone that we do bring on as the team and for the business as we move forward, and that growth.
It makes me think it can be more rewarding, as you said, because you're building the foundations, you are creating the rules to an extent, processes, the systems, how the organization will operate for the people who will be joining them as the organization is growing. But at the same time, you are more exposed when making these decisions.
Yes.
Because it will all fall back to you. It's a bit more risky, isn't it? It's more entrepreneurial, more rewarding, but it's more risky. You're more, those decisions, you're more accountable for them, and they all come back to you.
Yes, there is no one else to point to. It's, we're three of us here right now in this build, physically in this building. So, there is no one else. So yes, it is definitely an element of risk, but I am fortunate enough to be surrounded with the team and the owners of the company that understand that and support that. And we all want the same thing, right? We're all working towards the same goal and aligned on that. On a day-to-day basis, we all have our own paths to get there, but we're all working towards that together and kind of share that vision. So that's pretty exciting and pretty rare. What I'm doing now is very hands-on. There's all the strategy and the leadership work and the technical work and the customer development that I'm doing and interactions. But yesterday I was back wrenching on a piece of equipment, and I hadn't done that in a long time. So, I hadn't worked in a factory in a long time. I did, but I hadn't been there for quite some time. So I think the best leaders are the ones that at least have done some portion of the job themselves. And you don't always recognize or take the time to reflect on kind of maybe you've lost touch base a little bit on some of those things. So even though it's one of the more challenging things for me, because I haven't done it in a while and some of it's new, but I can see how much benefit there's going to be for the future too, that as I'm setting up all these things, like I said, setting the groundwork and doing a lot of it physically myself, then I know why I'm setting those rules or procedures or, all of those things, because I'm having the opportunity to have, that hands-on exposure myself, which is really rare, I think, at this point in my career, mid-career, to be able to do that.
What was the biggest learning for you having transitioned into this role? What was the biggest lesson?
I think the biggest thing that I had to learn how to do was to show myself grace. I tend to be a perfectionist. I tend to always want to do things right the first time and not have mistakes. As I reflect back on my management style over the years, I know I've been told this, been at times a pretty hard manager, and that I expect that from my team as well. And this experience has reminded me how valuable, showing yourself and your team grace can be, and allowing yourself to make some of those mistakes, because now that I'm back in this learning phase of, well, shoot, this is a brand new piece of equipment I'd never seen before. I'm going to make some mistakes. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to learn it. So it's been a really great reminder for me personally of that, both towards myself, but as we hire people, to maybe soften my perspective just a little bit on that.
Do you think it's made you a better leader? Taking on this role?
Yes, for sure. I think the broader your experiences are in general makes you a better leader, because it just broadens your perspective. I look at life the same way. I love to travel, and I've had lots of opportunities to travel globally, and I hope my kids to experience that too, because I just think the more things you see and learn firsthand, it just gives you a different perspective and a broader perspective to be able to see and understand the world around you. And same thing as a leader, within in a business, that the more you do and the more you challenge yourself to grow, the more you allow others around you to do the same.
If someone wanted to take on this role, what would you say are the three most important skills they would have to learn to do it successfully?
Number one is problem solving. There's new challenges that come up every single day. Number two is part of that, it falls into problem solving, but it just is creativity, finding creative solutions, because we are so short staffed. You have to find other resources, right? That maybe for me personally, coming from a large corporation where you had whole groups and teams of people or resources available, now I've got to find another way to get it done, right? We don't have that resource. So being creative in that. And last is patience. Like just really
Patience.
being able to sit in the moment, find where you're at, focus on it, and just be patient with the process, because nothing ever happens fast enough, and it's not going to. So you need to continue and maintain that drive for sure, but to also have the patience to understand that you're trying to accomplish a lot.
And what was the most challenging situation that you've experienced that you had to overcome?
I haven't really done anything with, or don't have a background in facilities, right? With building and equipment and the physical part of that. And a couple months ago, we got the first big piece of equipment, which is this expensive press that we bought. And it was coming in containers. And, we didn't even have a forklift here. So to find like, okay, well, what do we need to do to find a company that can help us, first of all, physically get it off the truck, and how do we unload it, and how do we get it set up, and how do we get this installed? Again, back to the creativity comment on, we don't have the resources here. It was literally just me standing in a giant building, and telling these guys what to do. So it was a bit overwhelming at first. I did have help with my coworkers, find the right contractors and people to get that done. And then just that confidence and that good feeling after it wasn't, okay, nothing went wrong. We got it in, it's running. Like that first one checked off the box, right? Like that first big piece of equipment here installed, like we figured it out. I got it all done. I managed the project and finished it. I think that was like, will always stand out as a big one in my mind.
So it's a piece of equipment that will produce the product that you then sell to your customers.
Yes.
So it was literally setting up the production line was it setting it up from scratch when you joined, or some
setting
parts
it up
of it,
from scratch.
some components
of
it?
It's a prototype line right now, not full production, but yes.
Wow. That's you see it physically, right? It's not just on paper. Something is happening.
You're literally building it. I mean, there's physically an empty room, and now it's has equipment in it. So there's no hypothetical there. It's a direct tie to what you're accomplishing.
Fantastic. A moment you're most proud of, or biggest success you're most proud of?
You mean overall career or most recently?
Up to you. Overall or most recent, if you prefer.
I think one of the biggest moments, and I had alluded to it a little bit before, was when I made manager. To me, at that point in my career, it was always a big goal. It's kind of was my driving force behind getting my master's degree. I had volunteered for, was told in my career, volunteer for all the extras. I wrote the quality system for the technical center. I went and did my PMP. I did all these extra things to try to get that. And for many years, kind of felt like I was spinning my wheels. I think many young people in their career in that first, 5 to 10 years sometimes feel like that. Like, why can't I just reach that first hurdle? So that one will always stand out to me as one of the biggest, I think. From there, it was a lot more progression once I kind of got my foot into that management path. Thankfully, I enjoy management. I know some people don't, but for me, it was a positive thing. So that's probably one of the biggest ones. Shortly thereafter, I had my first son, and then my second son. So everything after that was kind of crazy, but that was always one of my goals, kind of for me personally, before I started a family, was to at least kind of make that first management level. I think you can do it in any order. I don't feel like there's a set order, family versus work, especially these days. But that was my goal at the time. So I'm proud of that.
And talking about leadership in the automotive industry, so there've been any industry, the world is changing, any industry is changing. But I think there are interesting changes in the automotive industry. Electrification is a big one, and it impacts the entire supply chain, of course, and that in turn impacts the R&D investment and capex investment. And we've had recent challenges of supply
Yeah.
chain bottlenecks, etc., etc. How does that impact your role as a leader? All these changes happening in the industry.
A direct tie right now, today, not as much, but in general, there's huge impacts in, like, say, even the Detroit area, right? There's been all announcements in the news about chip manufacturing, coming here to Michigan now, more investment back into the US, into the technology sector that supports the automotive industry. So all of those types of investments in career and jobs bring the technology back into this area. And as a leader, for me personally, from like a hiring standpoint, personnel standpoint, it's a positive because you're bringing those types of employees. We already have a very high level of engineering and technical people and employees here in the Detroit, Michigan area because of automotive. But the more of that comes back, the more of those skill sets we continue to maintain in the area versus, as an example, them going to another country or overseas or something like that. So the more we can keep those technical expertise here in the area, the better it is for all of the engineering and more technical based companies.
So do you think there's a positive shift because there's more investment locally, actually? So it actually impacts businesses positively?
Yeah, I feel like there is, yes.
Uh-huh. Fantastic. And when it comes to the skills that are needed, does it have effect on the type of people you need, or the type of skills you need within your teams?
I think that is more driven by what we've seen from a corporate culture and from, the COVID shift than it is necessarily from technology. Here in Michigan, at least, a lot of the large employees are still, at least partially remote. As an example, for their work model, there's a lot more focus on flex work and things like that. When I was, really until COVID, most of us came up through most of our career and experiences going to the office 5 days a week, working 50, 60 hours a week. When I was at plants, we were there all the time. It's just, it's shifting in more of a cultural standpoint. So I think that will be more an interesting point for me here. We're kind of going against that trend in the sense that we're building a technical center where at least a portion of the roles that I will be looking to hire for physically need to be located here because they're hands-on jobs. And I think that's going to become, knowing some of our suppliers, as an example, that we work with that have some similar roles, that's currently somewhat of a job gap. And so those types of workers are going to need to continue to be developed. How do we get creative and attract high quality people still to those hands-on roles when their other option might be working remote, right? And so it's a different decision matrix now, and I think that's going to be more driven by that. I'm not as concerned today, but as we move forward in the next couple of years, we need to be very conscious of that and continue to take that, under review.
I'm also curious a little bit about, because of the topic ways women lead, and because I think things have changed so much since, I don't know, the last decade or since several years ago, but statistics still show that there are way less female engineers and way less female leaders in manufacturing and engineering and in automotive organizations. And you did say at the beginning that you were always passionate about mathematics, and so you followed your passion. Why do you think there aren't more women in engineering and in automotive? How could we inspire interest in this field?
I think it ties in a little bit to what I was just saying. Historically, it has never been a flexible work hour type option, right? Whether you're male or female, whatever your parenting role is, if you have children, as an example, you by nature, your schedule gets more complicated. And anytime you can add some flexible options in there, it just helps to manage that. And so when I served on the advisory board for the chemical engineering department at Nebraska for 15 years after I graduated. And, it was always that, how do you attract more, and a lot of it came down to that, historical. There's still a big chunk of historical engineering roles that are hands-on. They're dirty, they're in a factory. Some of them require a lot of heavy lifting or what, and so just physically they aren't as attractive to females often, and as a general group. But really, I think it comes more down to the work flexibility. So as there are more technical roles and even leadership roles that continue maybe in this flex schedule, 2 3 days in person kind of thing, and people feel like they have more degrees of freedom to manage their life as they need it, get their work done when they need to get it done, and manage their family when they need to do that. I think that makes it a lot more attractive. Is that the full solution? No, but I mean, it definitely is trending in the right direction. I know for me personally, my boys are 11 and 13, and just being able to, if I need to leave, go home. I was 100% remote until this year when we
Mhm.
opened this up. So I can do a lot of my work remote. If I need to go home, take care of something for an hour with them, and then, I'll probably work 2 more hours on my computer that night. It's my choice, but I have that option. And that is a much more attractive situation to me than saying you have to be there till 6 o'clock and you can't leave. And almost, I've worked in an environment where, it was almost shame if you left before a certain time. And those kinds of things I think are a bit outdated at this point, and hopefully we're, as a society, moving past that. I try really hard with my kids raising boys to talk about what I do, to talk about any successes that, my one son loves space. There's been some of the females in the news with NASA lately, and there's been a lot more activity there, so that's been exciting. But just trying to point out as a culture, I think, so I want, when my kids are in science class and my son's science partner is a female, I want him to be like encouraging her just as much as
Mhm.
the other way around. It's this culture that we have to build, with everyone, not just talking to little girls about it. It's talking to, all the next generation of acceptance and support and building each other up in that. And I think that takes generations to shift. But if I look at my generation versus my parents versus my grandparents, we're a lot more progressed than we were, for sure. So I hope we're on an exponential trend on that one.
Definitely. I'm very encouraged by the changes I'm seeing. I think it is demanded that work provides the flexibility now to people who want to have families and marry it with work. That flexibility is offered. It's very minor amount of organizations that still have old-fashioned kind of rules about it, but it's changing really fast. So I think definitely, I think we're in the right moment, in a very promising moment, and I think those numbers are just a legacy of some of the policies that were in organizations in the past. Because right now there are possibilities, but of course, let's say women need to move through the system, right? So they need to progress, and it takes generations, but we're on the right path, definitely set of the right direction. So it's really promising.
Yeah, it'll be interesting really to see the statistics, to me, for the next 5 years on reentry. That's always been a big statistic with women in
Mm.
technology. A lot of it's not as common in the US because of our maternity leave laws are very short, but it's pretty common to take off a year or 2 or 3 from your career, when your children are infants, during that time. And then it's always the question of, okay, when you're ready to re-enter the workforce, do you go back into a more rigid engineering career, or do you try to do something else? Since COVID, there's been a lot of changes with childcare and whatnot. So I'll be really curious to see that, like, percentage of re-entry of women that were in engineering or technology prior, maybe intentionally took some time off and are looking to re-enter, like what they choose, if they're able to find something still in their field of education or expertise that's now flexible enough for what they're looking at that point in their career.
Mhm.
That's typically where we lose a high percentage of females, and why they don't progress into leadership. If you take some time off, then it kind of interrupts that, and those paths haven't been available in the past.
That's true, especially if someone took a longer break. I think there's still a little bit of bias. If your break was too long, maybe you've lost skills. and cannot take on similar position, which I think it's a little bit unfair. But again, I think organizations are working on this, trying to open up more possibilities for women re-entering following the break. Final question. What is the most important advice you could give to your younger self if you were starting your career all over again?
If I look back, probably starting with university and career, it would be to have more fun.
Mhm,
I was very driven and focused. I still am, but I was very
mhm.
driven and focused in my education and at university and earlier in my career and trying to, like I said, kind of reach that first goal. And I'm very proud of that. But if I could do it over, I would have more fun along the way.
That's a good advice, I think. You can still do the same work, but just
Make
enjoy
time
it
for
more.
the fun, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
those extra moments.
yeah. I think that's a perfect note for the finish. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation. It was really interesting to hear your insights.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, goodbye.